Thank you, Greg. We pushed to get on time. We are a couple of minutes early. I'm going to see if Tony is close by. There was a couple of hands that jumped right up. Matt, I saw you first, so I'm going to let you ask your question. If Tony Rampton, you close by?
I just saw Tony.
Anything for Greg? If you have a question of Greg and wildlife, you got a chance right now. Got up at the top.
Okay, my question was for Tony,
Let's wait
but
for-
I think everybody in here needs to hear this.
Let's wait for Tony then to get in the audience. There's a wildlife question up top, Matt, okay?
Hey Greg, can you give us the objective on the count of the beaver of the Dutton Mountains? The elk?
Is that Daryl Spencer up there? I can't see too well. Yeah, I actually had a slide on here, but I wasn't really, it's on my PowerPoint, but I don't know if we have time to show that, but I can either show it to the group now if they want to reload my presentation, or if you want to catch me downstairs, I'll be here.
Well, I
There.
would like everybody to understand that it's hard to get along when the elk on the Beaver Mountain are 500 over objective right now, and it's directly impacting us getting the cow numbers cut up there.
Yeah.
The Dutton's over objective.
Can you go to the very last slide? You know, we just did these counts, and the challenge we're having, and we're trying to learn more. I talked about research there. One more slide. Some of these units are way under, and some are way over. And what we need to, talk about is how do we look at sort of a complex here? Because these elk move around, and they move around on weather conditions. They move around in different forage conditions. These are the counts we just did for those of you here in southern Utah. Some of these are way over. The Southwest Desert's over. Now, Nevada's elk are all in Utah right now. They don't have any. They have an objective over in Nevada. But, and so we're kind of counting theirs as well. But I don't know if you can read that up there, Daryl. But some of these units are over, and some are under. The Monroe were 800 under. So
But Greg, this is the problem. Everybody's led to believe just because the whole region might be out of objective or even below, that it's not an issue. The issue is the elk are way over objective in areas that directly affect us and are destroying our livelihood.
Right, I hear you. But the other thing that we need to work to figure out is this is where these elk are in January and February. I don't know if this is where those elk are in May and June and July when you're turning out on the mountain up there. So that's what you can help us work towards.
And you're totally wrong in your statement just now, because where I live, our cap is 600, and right now it's 12 to 1,500, and they are telling us the same thing you just told everyone here. Those are Utah elk.
Oh, well, someone's got it. They contacted us 2 days ago, and this, here in our Cedar City office, and said we're not finding elk in Nevada right now. So maybe we need to talk more about that. But that's what we heard from the Nevada biologist 2 days ago.
Yeah, let's do this a little offline. I know everybody's got an interest in their particular area. Greg, if that's okay, if you guys could visit offline. Matt, I'm going to give you the last question for Tony, and then we're going to break for lunch.
Okay, my question for Tony is, I think you skirted around one of the main issues on the grazing allotments, is that what about the Homestead Acts in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where the Homestead Acts did establish rights, grazing rights on allotments over the unincorporated lands, along with also when a lot of the private property rights were also established on regular property owned homesteads. Now those rights were established for grazing allotments then, and what you alluded to is that those are absolutely non-existent, And in my reading, even with the FLIPMA Act of 1976, it says in there that none of the prior laws would be affected by that FLIPMA Act of 76. So where are those grazing rights that were established through the Homesteading Acts?
Well, it's a totally different program. The Homestead Act, and there were several of them, and they were started in the East, and by going onto a piece of property, establishing a residence, and putting the land to productive use, you were entitled to title, a patent, to a certain amount of acreage. And it started out as 120 acres, I believe. As they moved west, people realized that there wasn't as much water out here, and that a 120-acre homestead didn't do any good. It couldn't sustain a ranch, couldn't really sustain a farm. So what they did is they changed the Homestead Act out here in the west to include more acreage. It went up to 640 acres. On that 640 acres, if what you were doing was ranching it, you got title to that 640 acres. That's golden. That's yours. Absolutely. What I said had nothing to do with that. There's no question that homestead patent is a property right. They can't take that away from you. The question is, okay, what about the land outside of the homestead that is public land, be it Forest Service or be it BLM, where there's a permit issue? What I'm saying is that the cases that I've read, and I've read a lot of cases in the last 2-3 weeks, what they say is that because you're allowed to graze outside of your homestead on public lands, you don't have a property right to graze off your homestead. You do on your homestead, and no question about it. That's your land. If you homesteaded and got a patent, that's your land. And you can use it for whatever purpose you want to use it.
Right, but also there were the grazing rights issued along with those homesteads, and there's rights of way, which the grazing permits, according to what I've read, they're not permits, they were allotments, and by definition, which attorneys seem to really get nitpicky, and I'm not an attorney and I don't claim to be one, but the grazing rights were established a certain amount of right-of-ways around water holes and along all livestock driveways getting to those water holes. And so that's what I'm talking about, and those rights were issued, and they are the same as private property rights, similar to
Okay,
private
what
property
you're talking about is water sources and the easements that were granted to and from those water sources, and the easements for cattle or sheep or whatever around the water sources. Those are rights of way, okay? And those were granted. But they're easements. They're not title. They're easements.
Even in the Hage case, in Judge Jones' decision, when he granted them a grazing right to get to their water, it was an easement that was granted to utilize their water. Now, of course, the Ninth Circuit has overturned that case. And I'm going to let one more comment, and then we're going to break for lunch. So
Let me just answer the difference between a title right and an easement is that, and this is the point that Professor McIntosh makes, and that is that you can have easements that are rights on the public land, but they're easements. They're a burden on the property. That's all they are. And they can be removed if the easement is withdrawn. It is a split estate. And most pieces of property have split estates. You've got surface rights, you've got subsurface rights, you've got dominant estates, you've got servient estates, and that's what you're talking about on easements. But easements, it doesn't mean you own it. You have a right in the easement, the right-of-way, not in the property itself.
Okay, Tony, one quick follow-up here with Todd, and then we'll.
Yeah, Tom.
Thank you. So, Tony, Todd McFarland, addressing the issues you're talking about, and I completely agree with you, and I think there's some misunderstanding about that, because some people are trying to perceive that someone's claiming that they own that land or have title because they may be claiming the easement that you're talking about. And I think that maybe some people are talking past each other there, because I think we can all agree that those are easements. You might, and again, we're talking about stock trails. I think according to the cases, those stock trails, depending on the act and depending on the circumstances, those stock trails could be up to several miles wide.
But they're easements.
Exact. Nobody's claiming that anybody owns title, but if they are stock trails and they're an easement back and forth between the water sources, then the livestock that are traveling back and forth can obviously graze on those easements. Nobody's disputing. And the point I want to make there, Tony, is that I think reasonable minds can disagree about some of those things. You'll remember Walt Ober back at the University of Utah Law School, and that's one of the things he used to say. Reasonable minds can disagree about some of these things. And Tony, you and I have talked about this, and I think there is some room for more discussion than basically you've presented it this morning. You've made it sound very clear-cut. You've studied these cases, and I respect that, and my position is I think reasonable minds can disagree about some of those things. And my other point is this. I think at the end of the day, and you and I have both talked about this, we all have the same objective here in the West and here in Utah and the Farm Bureau. We want to protect these grazing rights. We want to protect
Absolutely.
the ranching industry. We can all agree about that. Maybe we don't all agree about all the ways, and I've told you, completely supportive of everything you do and appreciate it, but I think that there can be other ideas and theories. And the point I want to make there is that Dr. McIntosh, who is the proponent of those theories and ideas, because I think it's only fair that he have an opportunity to let people hear his side of the story. They've heard yours this morning. He's going to be here this afternoon. He's made arrangements to rent a room here at this facility starting at 5 o'clock to let other people hear his side of the story. That's what we did in Paiute County. He didn't go there because he wanted to go there. Those ranchers invited him. You were there. We invited you to speak, to tell your side of the story too. I think it's important that everybody have the opportunity to hear both sides.
Okay, I think that was a statement, Tony. I'm not sure it calls for much of a comment.
I had a question for Tony. I asked him out in the hall, I said, if the H case had been appealed in the 10th Circuit instead of the 9th, because we all know the 9th is a lot more liberal, do you think the outcome would have been different?
In my opinion, yes.
And I talked to Ramona a couple of weeks ago, and I think they will appeal it.
There's too much law behind that decision.
Okay.
Thank you, Randy, for letting me take a minute or two there.
I saw you move to the front, Todd, to welcome. Folks, the sponsors on the back of the program have covered a lunch for you today. Going west out of the front doors, there's an administration building. It's the second building down. I think we'll be able to all get there. There's a sack lunch and a drink for you there. Let's go down there. There's about 300